And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And whatsoever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Now, if someone were to ask me what the primary problem with most Americans today is, I think that I could come to a conclusion pretty easily, and that is that people are just not content. They're not happy. They're not satisfied. However, whatever term or whatever language you want to use, and one of the reasons people's lives are out of control is because we fall into this terrible myth, and the myth is the more we get, the more stuff we accumulate, the better off we're going to be and the happier we're going to be. And that's absolutely a fallacy. It isn't true. And the Bible teaches that throughout the scriptures. But some people think I've got to attain more, I've got to achieve more, I've got to accumulate more, I've got to buy more. If I just buy more, I'll be happy. And most people live the if-only game. And the if-only game goes like this: if I only had a new car, I would be happy. If I only had a bigger home or a nicer place to live, I would be happy. If I just had some new furniture for my house, I would be happy. If I just had a bigger TV, I would be happy. And maybe you've experienced some of that in your life. Maybe you've grown up with that kind of cloud hanging over you, that myth driving your life, that if you just experience something more, then you'll be happier. But then we know what happens. The new car smell goes away. They've even done it now where you can drive your old car and get a new car smell. Nothing funnier than getting in an old car and it smelling like it's brand new, and everything about you tells you this car is not new. But it's just in a way to try to achieve something else, but we always experience a letdown. We live our lives as if just over the next hill, if just through the next trial, just at the end of the rainbow, if I can ever just get there, then I'll be content. I'll be happy. That's just the one more thing I need to bring happiness to my life. You grow up as a kid and you think, if I can just get to the point that I can get out of this stinking house and get off on my own, then I'll be happy. And then they get to the point where they say, well, if I could just find me a good job, a good career, I'll be happy. And then they say, well, if I could just find somebody who will marry me, it doesn't really matter who, just somebody who will marry me, then I'll be happy. And then they say, well, if I could just have some kids, then I would be happy. And then they say, if I can ever just get these kids out of my house, then I'll be happy. So it's just always a never-ending cycle where it's just one more thing to make you happy, and it really doesn't work. You see the difficulty, you see the problem, you see what the pitfall is. We really believe if we can just survive one more hardship, one more hurdle, one more obstacle, one more thing that gets in my way, then my life will be just like I want it. And so we fight and we jump and we go through and push through, and what do we find? The challengings are just as real the next day as they were today. And even if the definition of what the trial is changes, it's still a trial, because there's just no really contentment. What we want is contentment. That's what we want. One author said this: many of us make happiness a lifelong pursuit. As we spend money, collect things, search for new and better experiences. But what happens when the toys rust and the loved one dies and health deteriorates and the money is stolen and the party is over? Then what? Then what? Despair sets in because there's a vacuum in our lives. If you look around at the chaos that's going on in our country, it's because the people who are creating the chaos aren't happy. They're discontented. And they want you to do something. Maybe we don't even know what it is we're supposed to do. But if you'll just do that, then we can all be happy. We can all agree. So I'm going to tell you this morning, at least for you, this isn't the answer for politics, because I don't have any answer for politics. This isn't the answer for government, although you can make that argument. But that's not my purpose today. My purpose is to try to help you. So how is it that we can take that step to more contentment? I'm going to show you here in the scripture, but to sum up what I'm going to say, the answer is to simplify your lives. Less is more. You can get along with less than what you have right now. I don't care how much you got or how little you got. You can get along with less. So much clutter, so much stuff. I used to have a bookshelf that covered a whole wall in a room. Now, that bookshelf was very special to me. Just to chase a rabbit here a minute. It was made out of cherry wood. My family had it made for me because it was the cherry wood that my dad had collected to build his own casket. Now, that's a weird guy. But my dad was a little weird. He didn't want to have to pay for a casket, so he got his own wood, was going to make his casket, but he died before he could. So, that's just a bypass to show you about my dad. But here's this bookshelf, and it's full of books, full of books. Books I read, books I'd never read, books I'd read again. Books, 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 books. What happened to those books? I gave most of them away. Why? I'm tired of carrying boxes of books. Every time I move, what are we going to do with these books? I don't know. Let's do something with them. Finally, I had 63 volumes of Charles Spurgeon, one of my preaching heroes. I had 63 volumes, about that thick, of books lining the shelf. And you know what I discovered one day? Every one of them is on the phone. Every one of them is on that. And now I've got this little thing instead of 63 volumes of books. Less is more. You don't have to have all that stuff. So I want you to take stock in getting rid of things you really don't need and complicating your lives and just look around. I mean, it's spring. Why not have a spring cleaning and just say, you know what, we don't even use this anymore. You really want a challenge, you want to do something fun, just go to that storage unit and throw everything away. Don't even look in the boxes. You say, oh, no, I can't do that. You don't even know what's in there. And you haven't used it in years. And you know what will happen as soon as you open that box? Oh, we'll probably need that someday. And then you put it away for 10 more years. And what's going to happen? You're going to die, and your kids are going to go, we don't need this junk. Now, I'm not saying throw it away. Give it away, sell it, have a yard sale. Just get rid of some stuff. But even doing the outside thing won't really work because living with less doesn't really answer the question, because you can get rid of a bunch of stuff and still be not content, because contentment is an inside job. It starts with the heart. I mean, you could go home today and say, yep, that's what we're going to do. I've been trying to tell you for a long time we need to get rid of some stuff. I preached a message like this one time, and Bruce Cotton was able to be with us in those days. And as I was back in the back and he was going out the door, and I don't go to the back anymore because of health reasons, but anyway, he was going out and I was at the back door, and he said, do you know anybody who could use an extra barn full of stuff? But getting rid of stuff, I mean, that's just not going to be the answer. What has to happen is there has to be a real change of heart. What's going on in here? And that's what we're going to try to look at today. Because we really need to appreciate the good things of our life, because if we appreciate the good things of our life from the inside out, then those good things that we know we have will overshadow the bad things that happen to us. We can always go back. Actually, there's a therapy for this in counseling, and it's called cognitive behavior therapy. And cognitive behavior therapy simply is, you want a lesson in cognitive behavior therapy? You probably already do it. It simply means for every negative thought, you come with a new thought. Because we do a lot of negative self-talk. We're our biggest critic. We have an inner voice that is a critic. And so you got to come up with things that are positive. And when I'm dealing with people and counseling people, and I still do it actively, when I do that, when I talk to people and I say this, before we talk next time, I'd like for you to write down 5 things that are good about you. Oh, I don't know if I could ever do that. I mean, 5 things you do good? 5? 5? Well, if you need some help, ask somebody else. Because we need to think in that way, because it will get you through to a gratitude attitude. So you cultivate these 3 things, all right? I'll be fast. Number 1, the first thing you have to do to find contentment is find joy and appreciate yourself. Jesus even said it. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, you can make yourself an idol. I'm not talking about that. I would preach against that. And I would even preach against self if self takes the place of God. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a self-awareness of your own strength. And some great saint of years ago, his name was Bernard. I hate to even use his name, how they call him, because it sounds like the breed of a dog, but this guy really was Saint Bernard. And he said this, stage number 1, love yourself for self's sake. That's every baby who's ever been born. Stage number 2, love God for self's sake. It's to my benefit to have a relationship with God. Amen? If I don't have any other relationship with God for any other reason, it works out good for me. That's the second step. The third step is love God for God's sake. Because he deserves that. And then the fourth step and the highest step is love self for God's sake. That's where we sort of fall off the wagon. We may never ever get past step 2. But understanding loving yourself for God's sake, that's the final stage of spiritual growth. Let me see if I can illustrate this story. A young woman grew up in a good home, family values, moral values, went to church, Christian, born again, loved God. She went off to college, and she faced a severe test. Now, she's active in her faith at school. She's involved in all kinds of youth groups. She's president of everything, made good grades, had a great attitude, nothing wrong. One day she sent an email to her pastor and it said this, Pastor, I've just made the most important decision of my life. Now when he read that, he thought, oh, what could she have done? And she goes on to tell the story of what happened. She and her friends were going to attend a fraternity party off campus. And she said, my heart really wasn't in it, Pastor, but you see, there was this boy I really liked, and he was going to be there. So I decided to go. So we drove to the party. It was out on a farm. They had a big bonfire, and of course there was lots of alcohol there. And this guy she really liked came up to her and started talking to her. Of course, her heart's all fluttered now. Her dreams come true. This guy's the guy she dreamed of. He's talking to her. And then he opened his hand and he said, let's go smoke some of these. Marijuana. She said, I was so tempted to do it, Pastor, because this was the guy I dreamed of. Nobody would ever know. And I really liked this guy. But I knew it was wrong. And just as I was about to make my decision, suddenly I felt a presence come over me. It felt like someone was above me, and she said, I knew it was Jesus. And he said this, don't do that. You're worth more than that. And she said, I didn't do it. I didn't do it because God loves me so much that I have to love myself and not do things to myself that's going to hurt me. That's what we're talking about. Love of self for God's sake. Happiness, contentment, that's found in knowing your worth. Your soul is worth, according to Jesus Christ, I guess, who is an expert on these things. He says that one person's soul is worth more than all the riches of the whole world. For he said, if you gain the whole world and lost your soul, you would be at the loss. So you have to value that. So the greatest thing you can do for yourself is today go look in the mirror and say, you know, I like you because I love God. That's really hard for women. Because women look in the mirror and they don't usually like what they see. Men look in the mirror and go, I don't know why she stays with me. But for women, that self-worth is so important. Number 2, to find contentment, we have to appreciate other people. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I just preached a message on this a couple of weeks ago, but life is so precious. It's important for us to be grateful for other people. Human beings are the strangest things in all the world. Human beings are the only people who hurt the most, the people we love the most. We'll say unkind things. And we'll choose to look at the bad rather than accent the good. I've done a lot of research on counseling and marriage and relationships. And research shows that in order for your marriage to stay healthy and on top, you need to say at least 5 positive things every day to your spouse. How are we doing? Every day. I mean, it doesn't have to be a love letter. It can be a short text. It can be a brief phone call. Thank you for supper. Thank you for mowing the yard. Something positive every day. 5 things positive. And if you look at most marriages today, I'm not saying about you folks. You folks are good folks, but I'm talking about others. There's probably a lot more negative things said than positive. Why didn't you get that done? This supper's burnt. Your mama sure was a better cook than you are. You're just a lazy no good. Cruel. Now, the Bible never advocates criticism. Doesn't say anything about criticism. You could reprove, and you can even rebuke, and you ought to exhort. But you just face it. When someone comes up to you and says, do you mind if I give you a little constructive criticism? I'm going to say, absolutely I mind. I know you want to make it constructive, but when you're done, you're going to feel better, and I'm going to feel worse. I know what that couched term means. Criticism doesn't do anybody good. Honest appreciation of what they do will work a lot better. And I'm not saying, live in a fairy tale land and believe everybody's right and everybody always does good and there doesn't have to be some argument and disagreement of getting through life, but never let it turn into criticism. One guy, Malcolm McDowell, wrote a book, and in that book he says that this researcher did a marital research in Washington, and he said he could predict 95% of the time whether a couple was going to be married could be divorced within, the name of the book is Blink, if you want to read it, by the way, it just came to me. So Blink, in this book, this researcher in Washington had this lab set up. He'd have a couple come in, and they would have a conversation just about anything for 15 minutes. This particular couple had a conversation about their dog, and they didn't agree about the dog. So they talked about the dog. They didn't argue. They didn't have fuss, but there was these comments and things, and when they walked out, that guy says that couple will be divorced in 5 years. How can you tell? Well, they had all these probes hooked up in a chair, and he could tell their rocking movements and their body movements and their sweat and blood pressure. all those kind of things. And he said the one thing that will destroy a marriage is when you get a point where you can't stand the other person. Just can't stand them. And when that happens, it'll ruin the marriage. Now, I don't know if he's true, if he's accurate, but I do know that if you have that disdain begin to grow in your heart, you need to get on your knees to God and say, God, please get this out of me. Because this will shipwreck us and any marriage. Several years ago, there was in Detroit a little boy. He was blind, born blind. His name was Stevie, and he was in the regular classroom, and a little mouse got loose in the classroom, and the kids jumped on their desks and started screaming and yelling, all scared of the little mouse. And the teacher said, Stevie, do you think you can help me find this mouse? So everybody in the room got deathly quiet. Stevie listened. Because he was blind, his hearing had elevated, and he said, yes, ma'am, that mouse is in the trash can. And she went over, and sure enough, there the mouse was. You know who that guy was? I know you've probably heard of him. Stevie Wonder. He said, that's the first time in my life that anyone saw anything positive about my blindness. And it changed the trajectory of my life. Appreciate others. Who do you appreciate? Who comes to mind? Who do you appreciate? Well, why don't you call them today, or write them a note, or send them a text, or send something personal and just say, hey, I was thinking about you today. I sure appreciate you. It might make their day. And it will certainly help you, because it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed to give compliments than to receive compliments. You might just find you get a little contentment out of that. That's 2. Number 3. Philippians. We haven't even looked at that yet. Philippians chapter 4. And here's the Apostle Paul. Let me give you a little background on what's going on. He's in prison when he writes this. That makes it even more impactful. He's in prison in Rome, and he says this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Now, he's talked about the church. This is the church of Macedonia. And they're a poor church. You read about them in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. They're a really poor church financially. And he says, I appreciate what you've given me and what you've sacrificed for me. But in verse 11 he says, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and know how to abound everywhere and in all things. I'm instructed both to be full and be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. Now, I'm not done with this. I'm going to talk about this a little bit today, but I promise you we'll revisit this. Because I tell you what, verse 11 gets in me, and I can't turn it loose. It's been in there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Because I've not learned in whatever state I am therewith to be content. I've not learned that lesson. And frankly, I'm quite afraid to pray for it. But it's a lesson I've got to learn. But that's our point right here. Paul's secret had nothing to do with himself. Paul's secret had his relationship with Jesus Christ. He said, I've learned to be content because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with circumstances. Circumstances can change. I can abound. I can get a raise. I can get more money. I can get more things. I can accumulate more notoriety and be famous and people know my name and have lots of followers. Or I can be abased. I can say everybody thinks I'm a nut and everybody stops following me and everybody starts rumors about me and everybody thinks I'm crazy. Paul said it doesn't make any difference. Whether I abound or abase. Now most of us do pretty good when we abound. The stock market is up. The 401k looks really good. But then 2008 hits, or this past year hits, and you go, man, I lost all my money. I don't know what I'm going to do. Paul said, I've learned to be content. Because contentment and joy is not something that happens out there, or is down the road, or is in the future. Contentment is in here and right now. And whatever the circumstances I'm in right now, that is where we find contentment. E. Stanley Jones, he was a famous preacher a generation ago, a good Methodist. He was preaching at First Baptist Church of Syracuse, and he said something that I know just shocked the audience. There was one person in particular that writes about this, who said it absolutely shocked me when he made this statement. Here's his statement. I've never been discouraged in the last 25 years of my life. What? Would you believe me if I said that? I've not been discouraged in the last 25 years of my life. He was a missionary to India, intellect, great preacher. But he was trying to do everything by himself. And he discovered that 25 years ago after 2 nervous breakdowns. He said he felt like the Lord came to him one day and said, Stanley, are you ready to turn your life over to me and just give it to me? And whatever happens, happens, and trust me that everything's going to be all right, because you'll have peace and you'll have health and you'll have energy. You'll have a great life if you'll just trust me for everything. And E. Stanley Jones said, on that night, I did that and it changed my life. Are you desperate for contentment? Do you want that inner joy and that peace? Then put your hand in the hand of Jesus Christ. Better yet, take your whole life, everything you own, everything you have, kids, possessions, everything you have, dreams, goals, everything you have, and put it in the hands of Jesus Christ and say, Lord, I am so sick of worrying about this business. I'm so sick about worrying about my kids. I'm so sick of being discontent with where I live and what I have, and I'm sick with not being happy with my job. Here it is. I'm going to put it in your hands, and I'm going to trust you.